This is the Ideas Podcast, the show where instructional designers discuss ideas over a nice cup of tea. Warning, other beverages may be consumed. In this episode, I catch up with Joe Senart, author of the Training is Blank blog and YouTube channel, instructional designer, trainer, and graphic designer. Listen in as we discuss the role of graphic design when creating great digital learning experiences and ask that ever-important question: as an instructional designer in 2020, do I need to become a graphic designer? Welcome to another episode of the Ideas Podcast. With me today is Joe Senart, here to talk all about the role of graphic design in the exciting world of e-learning and learning and development, and the role instructional designers are playing right now in really reshaping our industry much for the better. As always, Joe, over to yourself to give a brief introduction.
Sure. So, hi, thank you for having me. My name is Joe Senart, like you said. I've been doing instructional design and training for about 8 years, along with a mixture of graphic design and marketing for about 10 to 15. So most of that experience has been with marketing communication agencies like Epsilon, the former eBay Enterprise back in the day. I just say I used to work for eBay. Works great. Also, kind of additionally to all of that, I started up a graphic design blog targeted at instructional designers called Training is Blank, which I've been enjoying some early success with. So that's me in a nutshell.
Wow, that's much shorter than we get for the vast majority of the brief introductions that I request, so that's fantastic. But so much in there, some really interesting past experiences there, I'm sure, that we might be able to tap into. But before we get into any of that, learning malarkey, the important question, as we all know on this show, is about the tea or alternate beverage that you're drinking during the show. So, Joe, what have you got to sip on during this recording?
So I have a tea called Buddha's Blend. It's a white tea. It comes from we have a company out here called David's Tea. They're really cool, really chic. I'm a big fan because I'm a panda guy, which you can't see on the podcast, but it's in a panda can.
I can confirm that is a panda on a can, which is awesome.
It is pretty much why I bought it. It's actually pretty good. So according to this, white tea, green tea, jasmine pearls, white hibiscus, broth, blossoms, natural and artificial flavoring, and a little bit of caffeine because I could use that. It's not too bad. It's a little more bitter than I expected it to be, which could just mean I'm terrible at tea. But other than that, it's good sipping.
Marvellous stuff. I have gone a little bit off-piste. I should point out there is a time difference going on here. So
yes.
Whilst Joe is having a nice cup of tea, I believe you're about 7 hours behind the time that it is here in the UK. I am enjoying a lovely Belgian wheat beer with coriander and orange peel.
We could do a whole episode just talking beer, I feel. I am not going to have beer at 11 a.m.
No, I feel like that is the start of a problem. This is it is the end of the working day here in the UK. It is 6:15. I am entitled to a beer. It's not quite the end of the week, but why not? So, important stuff out of the way. Let's talk learning and graphic design. I said right back at the start that I kind of feel like the graphic design industry and maybe the more creative and media industries are really, or have been reshaping and are still reshaping the instructional design industry as a whole. I can remember not too long ago where graphic design and anything to do with what the content looked like was considered a nice to have or a luxury if the project could afford it. Not the case anymore. So I guess question one is, in this new world where it does matter, it's not a nice to have, as an instructional designer, do I also have to be a graphic designer?
Yeah, so I mean, you're spot on in that. It used to be very much a nice to have, and now with e-learning kind of taking over the industry because it has to, you don't get certain other luxuries of live training, like being able to move around a room and have all that focus be on you. Now all that you have is a screen in front of you. So the questions come up a lot. I've been a part of a lot of groups that have asked, or you have a lot of new instructional designers. Hi, I'm an educator coming into instructional design. These are the things that I've noticed. And yeah, that's a fantastic question. Do I need to have graphic design experience to be an instructional designer? So naturally, with my experience, I've been a champion of graphic design for so long. Let me be the first to tell you, no. You do not need to have instructional design experience to be a graphic designer, but it helps so much in ways that you probably won't even realize until they happen. That's kind of where I'm going to kick it off, because it leads into more conversation. Any job description you find out there, even those that are looking for e-learning, you're going to be doing predominant e-learning, you can get by putting words on a page. You can get by putting bullets on a PowerPoint slide. You will be able to be successful at the key parts of your job. It's going further than that, and there are some advantages and disadvantages that I'm sure we'll get to. You really will like at least having some respect for what graphic design brings.
Okay, that's as you say, it's an interesting answer, because if someone who does champion it to say no, but it helps, that's drawing us all in there.
I don't want to scare people into thinking that like suddenly you need a whole new skill set. Like I need to go learn Photoshop, or I need to go learn Canva, or I need to go learn something Adobe something.
That's certainly the one I run into a lot. It's a case of, so I'm new to instructional design, which Adobe software should I buy first? Which is always concerning, because none of those are about instructional design.
No, they are absolutely not.
However, realistically, they are the top shelf tools, shall we say, aren't they? Once you decide to make your learning, or branch into the graphic design side of the industry, they are the kind of the grade A tools, or at least in my experience, they're what everyone expects you to have. You're talking about job adverts. There are a lot of e-learning job adverts will now say must be able to use Adobe Creative Suite and those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that there's some big benefits to that. One, the freedom that you get with Adobe is massive, but two, from a company perspective, it's so much easier to get those licenses. Chances are you already have some with your creative team. And additionally, it's a skill set that is a lot more common, so it opens up my interview pool. If I have people who are just this niche program and this niche program and this niche program, I have Canva, I have Yond. If I suddenly create all my content in that, I am now trapped to that type of, that program, that very specific program. Whereas Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, those are a lot more common to find out, and it doesn't really matter if you're an instructional designer or not. So that's kind of when I think that's part of the draw of the Adobe experience. Not required at all, but that's just me spitballing.
No, I'd agree. I think as a lifelong supporter of Linux and the complete lack of Adobe software available on the platform, it's always been a pet peeve for me. But when I went from working for people to starting a business, I very quickly realised that the ease of licensing plays a huge role in that. And it's maybe, as you say, a case where certain softwares can leave you trapped. I think it's really interesting you say that, because I'd never really thought about that, but you're exactly right. When I need to find someone to create video content, I don't generally look for people with Vyond or a certain type. I look for people who can create bespoke content, which pretty much sort of narrows it down to either an open source software, which will make me nervous because I don't know if it's going to be compatible with my client's work, or the standard that is Adobe.
So if it helps for those of you guys looking to get into video, please do not worry about Adobe Premiere and After Effects. That is going way too far in your video creation experience and does not help you in training at all. There are much better video editing tools targeted at training. So just I gotta throw that out there. Adobe's great for a lot of things. Don't use it for video and training. It's too much for too little benefit, in my opinion.
I think that's really interesting as well. Again, my experience in attempting to learn animation was short-lived, and pretty much ended in me realising this is not the skill set that I have the time to develop. And in fact, there are professionals who do this really, really well that I can use, contract to, work with, as opposed to use. So I guess that kind of leads back into what you were saying around you don't need to be a graphic designer, but it helps. And I know one of the elements where that's true is that whilst good graphic design sometimes even goes unnoticed, and that's sometimes the point, bad graphic design always stands out.
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Put that on a bumper sticker. Let me frame that. Because that's exactly what I feel is the biggest benefit to graphic design. We are so, instructional designers. This is where it blends in a way that, I kind of mentioned in ways you probably don't think about too much. As instructional designers and content creators, you're so focused on like the process, the outline, the learning paths, the fundamentals, the taxonomies, the dichotomies, the take your pick of thing. And we're talking about how do we engage learners and how do we bring them into our content and get their attention. And like you said, it is very easy to lose a learner's attention, and that's pretty much not solely, but mostly done in the graphic design element. I'll give you an easy example for anybody out there who's ever watched a webinar. Think of a time where you looked at a slide and you saw a word that was misspelled. We'll keep it really easy. So you see a word that's misspelled, and you say, "Wow, that was misspelled." You have an internal dialogue for just a second. First time, it's just a second. Oh, I wonder if they noticed that. Maybe you ask, "Hey, QA, you had one job." All right? A couple seconds of time. That's not a big deal. Now let's make it 5 words. Let's make it 9 words. At what point do you start looking at this and saying, and having it question the professionalism of this content? How much faith do you put in because of something that should be so easy to fix and correct that, the instructional designer might not have been thinking of because at least the content was good? It's those internal dialogues. It's those things you notice. And again, in the e-learning industry, I don't have the ability to grab your attention and notice that you're not paying attention. I have to trust that you're focused on what I'm telling you. But if you're just staring at my misspellings, if you're staring at all these quirks, you're just instinctively going to get yourself off topic. So yeah, losing attention, that's why graphic design is so important.
And it's interesting you say about the sort of the difference between the instructional designers losing sight of that. And I think you can see that there's a big push around the idea of split attention when we talk about content and putting different bits of content on the page. But it's actually the same principle. We're just not applying it to another thing in the same area. Which is maybe a bit of a reflection there that there's something to learn.
My favorite is always, if you've ever worked corporate land, when an executive does a webinar and they throw up a slide that just has about 600 words on it, and they slowly go through bullets. And you have to ask, all right, as a learner, what am I supposed to do with this? Am I supposed to be reading this slide? Am I supposed to find where you are? You can visually read so much faster than somebody can speak. So I'm already out of sync with you because you're talking slower than I've already processed your information. So again, I'm just going somewhere else with my attention now. I've got all this peripheral vision. I've got dogs on the other screen I want to take a look at. It's such a big thing that you don't get the opportunity to manage when you are dealing with virtual learning.
Absolutely. I think I hate the phrase, but in our wonderful new normal, which is the catchphrase for 2020, isn't it? But in the learning environment that we now find ourselves in, we're no longer competing with stuff in the office. We're competing with the fact that Netflix is paused while they do this piece of training.
Exactly.
Or they tune into the webinar. That's a much higher level of competition than we've ever faced before. We've always said, we want to be the Netflix of learning. We're going to be like Google. We're not.
No, you don't.
We're just,
You're not.
Exactly. It's a slightly unrealistic goal, let's be honest. First of all, Google, how many billions do they spend on coffee per year? Then the rest of their budget.
If I had a quarter for every time somebody at the beginning of a learning said, "Are we going to be able to get the PowerPoint deck after this presentation?" It's like, great, I just lost you. You don't care anymore. You're just going to glance through the PowerPoint deck when we're done. Thanks for wasting all of our time.
The scary thing is the number of people who still say, yes, of course, not a problem. As if somehow this is a good thing.
Yeah, it just... I mean, I get it. It's nice as a hard copy afterwards, but there's more to this conversation. I'd like to hope that I'm bringing more than just what I put on a PowerPoint slide. If I'm not, then yeah, we don't need to be here. But that's what makes us instructional designers, as opposed to that guy that knows things and can put it on PowerPoint.
Well, that's exactly it. And once we step down maybe to that position of the guy with the PowerPoint, as you say, there really is no point. What are we getting paid for?
Right.
That's a scary admission. No one listen to that. If you're currently hiring instructional designers, that's a lie. But I guess when we talk about all this coming back to instructional design, graphic design specifically, I guess we spoke about how you can lose their attention, how we're competing against a very, very different set of distractions, Netflix, Google, YouTube, all these things. How would you say graphic design really plays a role in winning people's attention and getting them to stick with the learning?
Sure. So the best thing that I can tell you if you're thinking about how does graphic design play a part is it will help you compete more than anything else you can do outside of screaming into the microphone when you want somebody to pay attention. And that's pretty much going to get them to just leave and ask for the PowerPoint deck because it's loud and angry. So good graphic design practice gives you that opportunity to pull people back at key moments. I think it's rather insane for an e-learning developer to think. It's honestly insane for literally anybody, any video creator, even you as a podcast creator, to assume that people are going to spend 100% of their time focused on every second, every frame of everything that you do. That is a losing battle. So that's where graphic design and good practice comes in. It competes to try to pull that back, if even for an instant. And the thing that I want to truly try to emphasize is that that's okay. That is an okay relationship to have with your learner, that they are not 100% focused and committed to what you've got. It is impossible to deal with that. So pick your battles, find your moments of focus, and you can use audio techniques. You can use graphic design techniques, such as like animation, something out of the corner of your eye that moves, to get people back, even for a split second, to notice what you want them to notice.
I think that's a really good point about that acceptance that the person is not going to be nailed to the seat, eyes propped open, with all their focus on you. And I think we do forget that. We really, really do. And I think the current situation brings it home more than anything has in the last decade. The old argument of, well, they were told, therefore they learned. Which, of course, we've all known is not true for a very long time. But now we're facing the reality of that.
Yeah, and the beauty about it with e-learning is that, to try to help ease your mind that, oh gosh, that means I'm not getting 100% of time. You're online, you're on a computer. That's the beauty of the rewind button. If you've done your job, if you've made something interesting to a point where somebody says, I feel like I missed something, they can go back. That's the beauty of digital learning versus the analog, straight line, straight timetable live experience, which even then you can simply just ask, hey, I misunderstood that. Can I repeat that? Like, you have a lot more power than you think, because the learner has complete power over their experience. Let them go back and be okay with them needing to rewind from time to time. It's fine. It's okay. You're good.
Well, it goes back to the basic principle of learner control. Ultimately, the less control we have over someone's learning experience, the better that learning experience tends to be for them. As much as we're the guardians of learning and we know what we're talking about, we're not the ones doing it. Yes. Yeah.
And they don't know, like they don't know Bloom's taxonomy. If they're like looking at an interaction on a training or something, they're not saying, wow, this really is enforcing my learning. If they see a 5-minute video, they're not going to come to you and be like, thank you for creating a micro learning out of what could have been a long form training. They don't care. They don't know this.
Well, no, at the end of the day, the person wants to, certainly in the corporate setting, the person wants to be able to do their job, make money, and not get fired. Those are the reasons we send people to training.
Exactly.
In the real world. We might add on from a business point of view, don't get us sued.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's none of those things are the things that anyone would usually go, oh, that's an engaging topic. You know, oh, I'm excited to not be sued by a regulatory committee this year. Yeah. However, those pieces can, as you say, be made engaging about how they're delivered, and it doesn't matter that the technically it's this form of delivery. It's about what works for that person at the end.
Exactly.
And speaking about what works, this would probably be a good point. So we've spoken a lot about what graphic design can do for your e-learning, what it can take away when it's done badly. So how do we get it right? As an instructional designer, and I say this as an instructional designer with a very, very poor standard of graphic design skills, I've worked on them and I've worked with people who have helped me work on them, but it's not my core skill set, I'll be the first to admit.
I really like your podcast logo, so at least you have an eye for what's good. One
of those things where I started the job off and then one of the people that helps me out got involved. But I think there is a time for that as well. As much as I try and do as much my own stuff as I can as an instructional designer, there are times when I go, this needs that next level, let me find an expert. But similarly, there are basics that I know I've incorporated into my sort of standard practice, basic principles. And I guess as an instructional designer coming to you and saying, what should I be focusing on? What are the core things that you think every ID could use graphic design wise?
I think the first thing that before I jump into how to embrace it as a skill set, I have to make sure that it's emphasized that QA is your friend. Again, as instructional designers, we're focused on how well the content works, but we don't really think too much about the look of it. In an instructional design field, a QA for me is spelling, it's alignment, it's size, it's readability, it's do things look clean, do things look crisp. Most importantly, is there an anomaly that I'm going to turn my eye to as a learner and that suddenly becomes the focus, which could even just be a couple pixels off of a bullet, or the alignment's a little different, like one line is just closer vertically than another. I'm going to notice those things. It seems weird and it seems really petty, but then they stack up. Then you do it over and over again. Then you see text on a color that might be hard to read. Then you see a font that might be hard to read. Then you see an image that's really squished and looks unprofessional. Then you see something slanted or tilted or something not aligned. All these little things come together to create the viewing experience, not the listening experience, not the comprehending experience, but the one in front of my eyes. And it stacks up. So QA is so important as far as, things to take as a graphic designer. Look out for those anomalies. It's like looking at a gate, right? Like a chain link fence, and one of the chain links is missing. You see that immediately. You see that absolutely immediately. You turn towards that, even though if you were to go past it just normally, you just kind of blur. It just blurs in front of you. Second you see something different that seems a little off, like put flashlights and spotlights on it. That's where you're gonna go.
You're absolutely right. It's interesting. About a year ago, I started working with someone for the first time, with them as a client, and text treatment is their thing. And I found a whole new world of pain that I had never even considered before. And
typography and whatnot.
Exactly. And the worst thing about the whole thing is I'd make the changes, look at it and go, they're right. I can't argue with it. And it's exactly the stuff you're talking about, those small spaces. And it can be as little as a few pixels. And it's amazing how much you notice it. You hear it and say, no human being would notice that. But I absolutely do. And it's painfully obvious once you start having it pointed out to you and making the adjustments. And it's incredible. Sure. It's incredible how those little changes, like you say, the level of professionalism that you pick up from the work skyrockets. It really does.
Yeah. On the topic of fonts, since you mentioned it, I actually, in my training as Blank, I just did an episode all about fonts and font personalities. And respecting that fonts do in fact have a personality. So that's one of the, it kind of makes me giggle that you just learned the nightmare that is, because there's so much to it. And an example that I used the Star Wars font. So for those of you, please go see the episode because it's a really good example. But Sorry, that's my plug. But if you've seen Star Wars, right? At the very beginning, you get Star Wars. Big, bold, epic, cool sci-fi letters, right? I'm sorry if you hear beeping. That's the dog. I have a dog, everyone. He just learned the squeaky toy. I can get her out of here. One sec. So one of the examples that I have regarding fonts and kind of font personality is Star Wars and why it's so important. And it's actually going to lead into another kind of a do for graphic designers and something to think about, is when Star Wars opens as a movie, if you've seen it, which I really hope you have. If not, welcome to Out From Under the Rock. There's it's very big and bold and very sci-fi looking. It makes a statement. But then you have that crawl that kind of tells you what the story is so far. And it is a completely different font. That's intentional. If you try to make that pit of text the same exact font as Star Wars and make it all sci-fi and personable, or and have just all this personality, nobody can read it. It is an absolute mess. So as far as kind of realize that your moments of impact as a graphic designer have personality to them. Your font choices are going to have personality. There's reasons that really basic ones like Ariel and Calibri and even Times New Roman, if you're feeling old fashioned, are used is because they're kind of bland and kind of generic. But if you go into like your company brand, your company logo probably is something different than that. And it conveys some sort of personality. Respect that. Respect that if you're going to use pictures, give them purpose because they are there for a reason. I will notice as a learner that it is trying to tell me something. Even if I have different colors, like if I change my screen, change my background to something different, I'm going to notice that is a big impact. So respect that. And the second thing to that is don't be afraid of it. Variety is fantastic. You want to know how to lose a learner from a graphic design and production design perspective? Do the same thing over and over and over. Take that white background and that text that you always use and never deviate from it. Never deviate from the size, never deviate from the location. Just stack it over and over. It's going to be boring. It will, and I'm going to see it all on a page and I'm going to turn back, and it's just... There's nothing visually stimulating for me as a learner. And again, in e-learning, you're competing against visual stimulation. So play around, try it out, embrace personality, embrace change, embrace impact. Don't be afraid to take your PowerPoint slide and the next one, do the reverse of it. Do really, instead of your black text on white, do dark color with white text. Throw them for a loop. Graphic design is all about keeping your viewers guessing, and that's not a bad thing here. If you go too crazy, then it's a bad thing, but if you can keep it subtle, if it has purpose, it's a fantastic do. It's a fantastic way to get people back to your screen when they're focused on their email or their or YouTube or Netflix. They'll see this big radical thing happen, and suddenly they're back to you for a little bit. And you've got a couple of seconds to get exactly what you want out of them, which is attention.
I think,
Sorry, that was a lot there.
No, it's a lot, but it's I think that's a really accessible example. I know we spoke briefly before the recording about Star Wars and our like and dislike of certain episodes. We shall leave those views out so as to not send people running from the audience. But yeah, I'd never really thought about it. But you are exactly right. And you say about the character of fonts and the personality of fonts, as I said, gone through that pain of discovering them and learning about them. Not only have I gone through that pain, I now own a small library of books on fonts. I speak regularly, font-based discussions with other people. It's terrible. It's like a small addiction.
Oh man!
But only on the basis that the power that you can actually have by switching something up. As you say, it's incredible, the sort of the bits of feedback. I kind of think, oh yeah, we'll try this with a kind of, oh, it's a different font, we'll see how it lands, how much difference can it really make. The feedback it's almost to the point where you're thinking it's really bizarre. People are coming back to me and going, the font on this particular screen, I loved it. And they're going, really? That's what you loved?
Yeah, we notice those things. For those of you who, maybe you don't have a lot of tools at your disposal, I'll give you a really, really easy one to play around with, and that's Ariel. And I know Ariel is the most common and the most boring and the most simple of everything out there, and it's why it's the default for just about every program. However, consider that there's Arial Black and Arial Narrow, which are two fonts that people don't usually use. Usually you get Arial and then a bolded version of Arial. Play with Black, play with Narrow. They are wildly different renditions of the same style. They have so much more impact because even though they have a same, I'm not going to get into terminology here for typography, same general look and feel, same general personality, they create so much contrast, and there's so much dynamic between each of those three that you have to look at it and be like, well, why did you create this? And then you put them together and you're like, oh, that's why. It's really cool. So try Arial Black as a headline instead of bolding your Arial font. It's a big difference. Try using Arial Narrow for like big points of impact. That's just a fun little trick. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with what a block quote is, but if you're reading an article, there's like a big there's like a big quote that's much bigger than the rest of the text. Oh man, I love using Arial Narrow for that. There's so much, I don't know why, there's just so much power in it, but it's also not blending with everything else. It's a moment of impact. I am drawing you to it. It is an anomaly. So hey guys at home, play with Arial and Black and Narrow. It's a really good entry point into fonts.
There we are, spreading the font addiction to all corners of the L&D community. We'll get together a new podcast as like a support group to help people get over this once it's got its claws in.
For sure. I will introduce you to Adobe Typekit and Font Squirrel and all these other websites that will terrify every single one of you.
Fantastic. So, but a really kind of practical way that, as you say, with no real extra tools, we can all start to improve the graphic design sitting within our work. So sure. The visual presence of the information is really kind of dictated by typeface. So a lot of the content is anyway.
Yeah, I think going further than that, because I don't want it to just be fonts either. There's kind of there's another thing to consider, and this is also in that realm of things that you probably aren't thinking about until they happen. Kind of says like it helps a ton, but you might not realize how. Here's one of the biggest ones that I know pretty much everybody employed deals with: company branding. And I'm not going to go on a big tirade on company branding. That is literally an entire podcast or episode of Training is Blank that I can do, that I plan on. But one of the challenges that we don't appreciate and respect is that sometimes you are at the mercy of company branding. But unless you have a really friendly creative team, that company branding, that creative team didn't develop your Camtasia assets. They didn't develop your Captivate themes. They didn't hop into Vyond. They didn't give you annotation styles. They didn't go into Rise and build you a color palette. That's why I feel there's a lot of importance and understanding, and why they're so valuable to get graphic design down. And that's why I try to emphasize QA the anomalies and try to make things look crisp. Don't be afraid of variety. It's not because I'm trying to entice you to get away from what the company is forcing you to do. It's because they're not thinking of the tools you're using. You don't get a choice sometimes. Again, unless you have a very friendly creative team, which I don't ever. So I have to do it on my own. But that's just something I wanted to make sure, like, I really want to push the power of that. It's not just because it moves the professional needle. It's not just because it looks great. It's not even just because it keeps people attention and it helps you compete in a peripheral vision world. Sometimes you really just don't have a choice. Sometimes you really just have a blank thing to work with and no guidance. So just try. I guess that's the biggest thing is just try some things. Be okay with it.
Yeah, and I think that's probably among the most powerful messages in the whole thing is just to give it a go, to not accept a blank page with bullet point text and that's fine, it's enough. And to, maybe get feedback on the first attempt to say, oh, what were you doing here? And actually go, that's fine. Because this is a new skill and it'll grow over time. I think we're all a little scared of that bit of feedback when it happens, but it's going to happen sooner or later. You may as well make it worthwhile. Learn something from it.
Phelps, my degree was graphic design. That's what I went to school for. So, I can throw a whole bunch of things out. I've had a few people reach out and say, oh, what I did doesn't look nearly as good as yours. I'm like, that's okay. Here are the things you did well that you can build from. Few things that I would change, not because I don't like the look. If anybody comes at you and says, I don't like the look, that's not necessarily a piece of feedback you can use. Usually there's going to be some driving force to that. Is it that you can't read it? Is it that it's drawing attention? You have competing attention. Things are kind of competing for attention on the same page. Is it because it's trying to make an impact and it's not? There's always a reason that something doesn't look good to somebody. It's a matter of finding that, and then it kind of just becomes part of your arsenal of things to avoid. So please don't worry if you're just dabbling into graphic design. I don't think this looks good. Functionality is so important in developing your graphic design skills on figuring out what colors work, what doesn't work. I love playing with watermarks. I like playing with muted colors. I don't like bold, bright colors personally on a screen because it just hurts your eyes. If you see it for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes straight, it's going to hurt your eyes. That's going to make an impact. Those are just things that I've learned. It's not that I didn't like how it looked. It's that functionally there were some problems. So keep those things kind of in the back of your mind as well.
Yeah, well, I was about to ask for kind of closing thoughts and ending message.
Oh, there you go.
I think, unless you've got another one to add, that was pretty good as it goes.
I could just recap everything, but that's I mean, it's, I guess, as far as a closing thought to those who are kind of still saying, okay, I haven't exactly said this is easy. I haven't exactly said this is difficult. And the thing is it's kind of the experience that you make. It's just being okay with not being right, just as with any new skill set, any new thing that you do. But the beauty about graphic design, and especially coming from an instructional design perspective, is that you have so much information to work off of. If a learner wants to learn something and you talk to them about, was this a viewing experience that you were okay with, you're going to get honest feedback very simply. If you ask the right questions, such as, was this something you could read? Was this something, did you kind of notice this thing over here that I wanted you to focus on? Did I actually bring you back to the screen when, maybe your attention was elsewhere? Maybe I had a lot of text on the screen that I was just talking through. It happens. But I needed to pull you back. Did I do that effectively? They have no problem saying yes or no to that. It's not something that, the wonderful thing is that graphic design is not something that your learners need to know the ins and outs of to give you great constructive feedback on it. Instructional design is a little different. I can ask trainers how I feel about training content, and they can give me fantastic things about, those dichotomies and those practices. Graphic design is all about the experience in the end. You don't need to know great graphic design tactics to be able to provide fantastic feedback on your viewing experience. So don't be too intimidated by getting it wrong, because you're going to get everything you need. You're going to be able to move forward. And eventually, as so many instructional designers have already done, you're going to just get into your own. You're going to learn a lot of it just by doing. So while you're in this point of discovery, try. Try something new. Try variety. See what works. See what doesn't. And there you go. That's what I got. There's my closing thought.
There we go. Well, as closing thoughts go, that is pretty good. I think my closing thought is I need to go back and maybe try a little harder. But certainly try out a lot of those, really simple things. I think so often we go to the extreme when we think of graphic design and we load up, every bit of software known to man.
Yeah. Thankfully you have a lot of resources at your disposal. That's the beauty also, is there's a lot of design websites that can give you some insight. One of the best things that I would suggest for anybody is to view the training of whatever program you're using. Not because you need to learn the program, but see the styles that they've used, especially with like your Adobes and your Vyonds and the ones that are all about the visual experience anyway. chances are their training department, their training team will give you some really cool ideas on how to use color, how to use space. It's just going to be a part of their training. You can latch onto those ideas. They will give you wonderful inspiration on what they do that's very unique. So just, yeah, your resources are out there. And chances are they're very free, especially if you're paying for it. So I've always liked Camtasia's. I'm a big champion of Camtasia. Camtasia's if you look at Camtasia's video, they are fantastic ways to do application training and program training. They do zoom ins heavily. They move you all around the screen. And if you were to not listen to any of it, it would look like an absolute mess. But they have a great way of dealing with timing, and they show some really cool tricks on transitioning into different parts of the screen. Like you'll zoom into a corner and then suddenly you're in the opposite corner. And you're like, that seems like it could be fast. Like if I'm just thinking about the experience, that's a really fast transition. I might have lost how we got there. No, you really don't. They have really cool tricks for it. So just look around at what's out there. Those programs you use, that's your inspiration. They give you a lot of good stuff.
Awesome. Well, I just really want to say thank you so much for taking the time out to sort of do this episode. I think there's so much that we've spoken about that people are going to get a lot of help from.
For sure. So, mind if I plug a little bit more, one more resource though? Because of course,
absolutely, we're always good for a plug.
Exactly. So if I haven't annoyed all of you yet, I have, like I said at the beginning, I have a graphic design blog that I target at instructional designers. I do say looking at design websites is fantastic, but sometimes those are for marketing purposes. That's usually what you think about with graphic design. The rules change with instructional design when you need to read a screen for a minute and a half, when you need to transition and get people to understand and remember and all the Bloom stuff. So please check me out, trainingisblank.com. I have a Facebook page as well, YouTube channel, where I focus on these little nuances of graphic design and production design. I did one all about fonts. I'm working on one called Training is Jealous that literally actually talks about the fight against peripheral vision and how do you pull people back. I show off some cool examples of that. I've got a lot of others as well. So it is all graphic design focused for those instructional designers that are asking the exact question we talked about at the start, which is, do you need experience? So there's my plug. All right.
Fantastic stuff. This is, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Linus Tech Tips on YouTube. This is the equivalent of his constant lttstore.com
yes.
in there, right there. But fantastic resource there, all free of charge. So I know where I'm spending the next 3 or 4 hours into a YouTube black hole where I go and hopefully learn something. But guys,
I only have a few episodes. It's going to take a half hour.
Oh, there we go. Even better. Guys, there'll be a link to Joe's website in the description of today's episode, as well as always, a link to my LinkedIn if you want to get in touch, either to discuss what we've been talking about in this episode or indeed to come on and record one with me. Everyone's point of view has value, and we would love to get you all involved. Joe, thank you ever so much for your time once again.
Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute blast.
No, the feeling's very mutual, and I have a feeling if you want to come back, you're always more than welcome, and we'd love to hear more from you.
For sure, would love to. Anytime. Probably not next time, but get a little variety yourself.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Ideas Podcast. If you'd like to continue the conversation or get in touch with me or Joe, our contact information will be in the description of this episode. If you'd like to get involved and come on the show, please do get in touch. We'd love to have a chat. But in the meantime, make sure you subscribe, hit like, and come back next week for another episode of the Ideas Podcast.